How's it going everyone? Welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'll show you how to make a bread dough with 100% butter. That's equal parts flour and butter. Let's go to the kitchen and check it out. With the butter content of 40 to 50%, regular brioche is already pretty rich. So this thing with 100% butter literally takes the cake. It almost is a cake. This recipe is mostly an exercise for seeing what is possible, and it just goes to prove that with bread making, with a little bit of elbow grease, anything is possible. Now, would I recommend making this? Well, why not? It's a great exercise, and the result is super rich and delicious. But let's have a little chat about gluten before we start. When it comes to bread making, fat and flour are not the best friends. There are two proteins in flour that make up gluten, called glutenin and gliadin. In the presence of water, they combine to form gluten. Now, fat coats the flour, hindering gluten formation. The resulting gluten strands are shorter, and that's why we call it shortening sometimes. So the more fat there is, the shorter the gluten strands. But there is one solution: you just work the dough for longer. And that's the approach we're going to take in this recipe. The ingredients are exactly the same as in any other brioche recipe: flour, butter, eggs, salt, yeast and sugar. All the ingredients must be stone cold, because we are going to work this dough for so long. Temperature control is of utmost importance here. I froze the flour, it's been in the freezer all day long. The eggs are cold and the butter is cold too. Of course, it will be pretty difficult to add cold butter to bread dough. So here's a trick I use when making brioche. Take a large piece of non-stick paper, add your butter, fold the paper over and then press the butter flat. A rolling pin is the best tool for this job. Flattening the butter like this makes it pliable and it will stay flexible even after we refrigerate it. And there's no exact science here, just make it flat, that's all. Now this can go back into the fridge until it's needed. And at this point we can start making our dough. In order to keep things really cold, I've kept the bowl in the freezer as well. This is especially useful when you're making a bread like this in summer. Add the eggs, the yeast, the salt and the sugar. Now give it all a good mix. You want to dissolve the salt and sugar and hydrate the yeast. Only when you don't feel any sugar scraping against the bottom of the bowl, add the flour. Dissolving everything beforehand just makes things easier down the line. Trust me, you don't want to be kneading a gritty dough for half an hour. Once you've added the flour, grab your scraper and mix it to a dough. And if the scraper is not doing the job, continue on by hand. We'll start off by kneading this dough with the regular kneading method. What I like to do is press down and forwards with the heel of my right hand, and then using the fingers on my left hand I fold the piece of dough under the heel of my right hand, then turn it and repeat. You want to continue doing this for around 10 minutes. It will be cold and it will be very sticky, but just scrape it off your hands and scrape it up from the table and continue. You can of course make this dough with a mixer. That'll take around 10 minutes on low speed. If your mixer bowl is quite large, you may need to double the recipe, or else the dough hook may not be able to pick up the dough and mix it effectively. So after the first 10 minutes of mixing, stretch the dough out. Now we can add the butter. And if you thought that it was a little bit sticky and messy earlier, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you know any of my enriched dough recipes, this process will be familiar to you. We call this tearing in the fat. Lay your butter on top of the dough, then fold the dough around the butter to enclose it. The following part just takes brute force. There's not really any technique to it. Pick the dough up, squeeze it, press it, mush it together. All we're trying to do is forcing the butter and the dough together. And if you find it more comfortable, you can do it on the table. It will take a minute or two. If you're going to use a mixer, then keep it on low speed and add the butter in chunks. And once the butter has been absorbed, turn the speed up to medium. And from there you might need to mix it for around 20 minutes. But this is how it's done by hand. Once you have combined the dough with the butter, scrape it all together. We'll continue with the stretch and fold kneading method. You want to pick the dough up, stretch it against the table towards yourself and fold it over forwards. It'll be very loose and sticky and messy. But please don't get discouraged. It will all come together at the end. It always does. The only problem is that unlike with other recipes, this one will become even stickier and messier after a couple minutes of kneading. But don't worry, it's totally normal. I mean, the butter is literally melting in your hands. It will feel like you're kneading a bowl of porridge. But as I said, do not get discouraged. It will come together eventually. But the first 10 to 15 minutes will be more or less just like this. I guess I forgot to mention, the stretch and fold stage will take 30 minutes. I personally find this part easier than the initial 10 minutes of kneading. Stretch and folds are kind of therapeutic. Just put some music on and keep going. Now what you are seeing here is about 15 minutes into the stretch and fold stage. The dough is nice and cohesive, but it's still loose and stretchy. And once it all came together, I had to knead it for around 15 more minutes. And this is what it should look like when it's done. And if you got this far, I congratulate you on making 100% butter brioche. Now let's pop this thing into the bowl and see if our temperature control measures have worked. Around 25 to 26 degrees Celsius just about right for this. And from here on out, it's just a regular brioche recipe. Cover it up and we can pop it into the fridge to start cooling down. The initial chilling will take 45 minutes. Now we can take the dough out and give it a fold. This folding step will help to build tension into the dough, strengthening the gluten. It will also help cool it down quicker. Place the dough on the table with the smooth side down, then stretch it out and fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until you reach point where you started. Then flip it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, and back in the bowl it goes. This is one of the rare occasions that I don't need to oil my table after making a dough. That's a good bonus, I'd say. This is the first fold out of 2, so cover the dough back up and pop it back into the fridge for another 45 minutes of chilling. The second fold is performed exactly the same as the first one, so I'll just fast forward through it. The dough will feel a little bit harder at this point. As the butter is cooling, it starts setting. And now it's ready for its long cold fermentation. You can leave it in the fridge for as little as 18 hours for up to 48 hours, but I'd say 24 hours just about perfect for this. Okay, it's the next day, we can continue making our bread. The dough is solid. As you can imagine, cold butter is hard, right? And from this point you can make pretty much anything you like. Do check out the brioche playlist for some inspiration. For once I just wanted to make a simple loaf. So weigh your dough and divide it into equal pieces. And that's 3 in my case. After dividing, we'll do a quick pre-shape. And there's nothing special here. We just want to flatten the dough, so it's all pretty much the same shape and size. You won't be able to shape it very well at this point because it's totally cold and hard. And flattening it will make it warm up sooner. Now a quick note on fat percentage in this recipe. It's not 100% fat. That's why I didn't call it 100% fat. It's 100% butter. The butter that I'm using is 82% fat. But we also have to count the fat of the egg yolks, which will add another 4% fat to this bread dough. So although it's 100% butter, it's 86% fat, which is still extremely high. Okay, so back to the dough. After pre-shaping, we'll let it rest for 30 minutes. This will give time for the dough to warm up and loosen. That'll make it a lot easier to shape. Give your dough a generous dusting of flour, release it from the table and flip it smooth side down. Now gradually flatten it out using your fingertips. If it's sticking to the table, pick it up and dust some more flour underneath it. This shaping technique is quite like the one I used in my milk bread recipe. So once you have a nice large oval shape, fold the 2 sides across in the middle. Make sure it sticks. Don't trap any air bubbles inside. And now starting from the top down, roll it. Try and make it nice and straight and uniform. I must say it's very easy to handle and a joy to work with. Far from what it was like when we were kneading it earlier. This is what it should look like once you rolled it up. Should have a nice little swirl in it. Make sure the seam stays on the bottom and then continue with the other 2. You should try and make them look exactly the same as the first one. This loaf will fit comfortably in a 1 kilo or 2 pound loaf tin. If you don't have a non-stick loaf tin, line it with some non-stick paper. You don't want to suffer through the disappointment of your loaf sticking to the tin, especially with all the work and time that's gone into it. Okay, so this is ready for the final proof. If you want it to rise quicker, place it in a warmer area, but not too warm. Anything over 26 degrees Celsius or 79 Fahrenheit might be too warm and the butter might start leaking out. It took this loaf 5 hours at 21 degrees Celsius or 70 Fahrenheit. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat your oven 160 degrees Celsius or 320 Fahrenheit with a fan on. Once your loaf has almost filled the tin, it's ready for the oven. Before it goes in, let's give it an egg glaze. This is 1 egg yolk with 1 teaspoon of milk. By the way, you should check out my glaze comparison video. I compared 15 of the most common glazes used in bread making. You can find it along many other interesting videos in the Principles of Baking playlist. Right, so this bad boy will take around 45 to 50 minutes of baking. I know it's quite a while, but it needs that long. And if you ever are unsure of the doneness of your loaf, take its temperature. It should read above 94 degrees Celsius, which is 200 Fahrenheit. And that goes for any bread. Okay, let's just stop and acknowledge the fact that we just made a 100% butter brioche. By hand. I did not even believe that it was possible, but here it is. Just look at that texture, it's extremely soft. The only way I could describe it as is an extremely light sponge soaked in butter. It is totally unnecessary and unhealthy, but it's well worth a try. So if you ever find adding fat to bread dough is difficult, just remember this video. It might inspire you to keep kneading just a little bit longer. So what do you think this crazy rich bread dough? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click right here. Subscribe to the channel, click over here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.